Good day, class. As usual, this is GSP 1201/2201, use of English lecture slides. This is for students of microbiology and zoology, that's group E2. And my name is Aliyu Yakubu Yusuf. As you can see, this is module 4, titled Writing Skills. And this is the first lecture in the module. And after this one, we are going to have another lecture still in module 4. So over to the next slide. This is an introduction. Here we have given an introduction to the module, and we say that the ability to write well is one of the most highly prized skills. It is a skill developed by practice, accompanied by a thorough knowledge of grammar, punctuation, and spelling, which we use to enable other people to understand what we want to see. What we are basically saying on this slide is writing is a highly important skill that we all need to learn. But for one to be able to learn effectively and professionally, one has to have a thorough knowledge of the language in terms of its grammar, punctuation, and spelling. That is why one cannot just acquire writing within a short period of time. Someone has to spend a lot of time learning, reading, practicing for him or her to be able to write effectively. So grammar, punctuation, and spelling are very important skills as far as writing is concerned, because you can't write using a bad or poor grammar and expect the writing to be accepted and cherished by others. Likewise, punctuation and spelling are highly important when it comes to writing. You have to be able to punctuate your sentences correctly, as well as good spelling. Now, what is writing itself? When we say writing, what do we mean? Writing is a type of accepted orderly written communication. Yes, writing is a situation in which words are translated into writing. Initially, a language exists in the first place in speech, but when the speech is translated, is put into readable codes or symbol, then it is turned into what we call writing. So writing is a form of written communication. It's a way in which communication is written and passed to other people. So, like I have said, when spoken words are translated or turned into readable codes or symbols through what we call alphabets, then we have what we call writing. So in essence, writing is a way in which alphabets are combined into words, words are combined into phrases, phrases are developed into clauses, and clauses are developed into sentences. Then sentences are developed into paragraphs, essays, chapters, and books. So as you can see, it's a sequential order. It begins with combining individual sounds or alphabets into words. Then from words, we develop words into phrases, phrases into clauses, clauses into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, then paragraphs into chapters, essays, and books. Writing itself expresses the inner thought or feeling or experience of the writer in a way that makes it understandable to other readers. So that is to say, writing does nothing but expresses what the writer thinks. So it expresses the inner thought or feelings or experiences of the writer, in which he or she passes information, his feelings, and his thought in a language that is understandable to other readers, so that they can understand what he or she is passing across to them. Now over to the next slide. Here on this slide we have essentials of good writing. There are some ingredients that any good writer must satisfy. In other words, there are some points, there are some criteria that any good writing has to strictly adhere to. These are the essentials of good writing. And here we have more than 10 of them on this slide and on the next slide. But here it says writing must satisfy the purpose of the writer and the reader. Yes, writing has to satisfy the purpose of both the writer and the reader. In other words, it has to capture what the writer has in mind and what the reader needs to read. It must be well thought out, such that the reader is able to identify its theme and purpose. Yes, writing must be well thought out. In other words, a writer has to think very carefully to make sure that the theme and the purpose of the writing is well and clearly spelled out, so that any reader, can easily identify those. A writer must choose a subject matter in which he or she is knowledgeable or can find materials to develop. Yes, that is also an important, essential, or important aspect of good writing. Writer is expected to write about a subject matter that he is knowledgeable in. Because when you come to write in an area that you are not knowledgeable in, then you will just be beating about the bush without giving any good idea that will arouse the interest of the reader. So it's important that a writer chooses an area that he or she is conversant with. A writing must be organized in such a way that the reader can identify its trend, and it must be coherent. All that parts must live together as well as show a particular direction of thought. The writer must then use appropriate connective words to make the sequence clear. Yes, coherence is a very important aspect of writing. As a writer, when you come to write, you must link your ideas from the beginning to the middle to the next stage to the other stage up to the last stage of the writing. How do you do that? Is by using what we call connectives or linking words. Words that link up one part of the essay or one paragraph to another paragraph, one idea to another idea, one point to the subsequent point. So your writing has to be coherent, has to have a link or chronology between one part of the essay to the next. Then the words chosen must be sufficiently comprehensible for the reader to understand the contents of the writing. Yes, as a writer, you should be able to use words that will be understood by your readers, because sometimes when you choose words that are archaic or unfamiliar to the reader, then they may interfere with understanding of your readers. So it's important the writer thinks about his or her target readers so that he or she can choose words that are appropriate to their level of understanding. The next is the grammatical structure must be correct. Use of concord spelling of words and correct punctuation. I explained this, that use of grammar, punctuation, and spelling is highly important when it comes to writing. So grammar, spelling, and punctuation marks must be appropriately used. A writing must be legible. When it is handwritten, then it must be legible, because sometimes there are many handwritings that are just terrible. So when you are using longhand, you must be able to write in a legible and a logical manner in which your readers will find it easy to read out what is written. And finally, it must be put in its right channel: report format, letter, minutes, article, memorandum, and communique, etc. So depending on the type of writing you are developing, you must use a proper or appropriate format or channel of writing. If it's a letter, it has to follow format of writing letters. If it's minutes, article, memorandum, or communique, it must follow the correct format of the kind of writing it is. Now over to the next slide. Here we have continuation of the essentials of good writing. It must be logical, and the thought and ideas must be sensible and must be sequential. Yes, whatever writer is writing, the ideas must be logical and sensible, because if the ideas don't make any sense to the reader, then the writer has done nothing but waste his time. So ideas must be logical, must be comprehensible, and must be sensible to the readers. And writing must mix sentence structures using simple, complex, and compound sentences. Yes, a very good writing always mixes many structures in one piece. In other words, you can't have a writing using only simple sentences or using only complex sentences or using only compound sentences. All these different structures of sentences are used concurrently in a single piece of writing, and that is what makes writing enjoyable uh, to the reader. As much as possible, it should express one idea in a paragraph. Yes, writers are expected to use or to develop one idea in a paragraph. In other words, an idea should be comprehensively explained in a single paragraph. Choosing a topic sentence and developing it in the paragraph with the topic sentence containing the main idea. Yes, like I have said, a good paragraph is the one that expresses only a single idea. That is to say, if there are 5 paragraphs in an AC, then it is expected that there are 5 different ideas in that AC. That is to say, an idea per paragraph, an idea per paragraph. And in each paragraph, there has to be a topic sentence that is clearly spelled out by the writer. And the topic sentence must contain the main idea. And it has to be located or situated in a place where the reader can easily locate that topic sentence or the main idea in each of the paragraphs. If it is not a fiction, it must be factual. Fiction allows imaginations, and factual writing admits accuracy and verifiable truth. Yes, depending on the kind of genre it is, then the writer must develop it in an appropriate manner. If it's a fiction, it allows for imagination and creativity on the part of the writer. The writer can imagine and create scenes, ideas, and other points. But if it is a factual writing, then it has to be accurate and verifiable. In other words, it has to have information that can be easily traced and verified by readers. If possible, illustrate ideas with data, visuals, charts, graphs, diagrams, pictures, and so on. Yes, if it is possible, then it's important writers use paragraphs, charts, diagrams, pictures, statistics, and so on to further illustrate or to further give illustration of what they are writing about. A good writing should be concise and precise without wasting words because of cost and time of the reader. Yes, good writing has to be concise, precise, and straight to the point. Writers are not expected to use too many words because that will waste the precious time of the readers. So, writing must be straight to the point, concise, and precise without using many words, otherwise, that will make it verbose to the reader and that will take a lot of time of the readers. If there is need to quote or use other people's original work, they must be acknowledged. Otherwise, the writer will be guilty of plagiarism or piracy, which is an act of stealing of intellectual property. Yes, if there is a need to quote or to use quotation from other people's work, then they must be acknowledged and cited in the references. When you feel the need to bring what other people have said, what other people have said about that uh, writing, what other people have said that you find important in your writing, then you can do that. You can quote other people, you can cite references from other people's work, but that must be cited or acknowledged by the writer. Otherwise, he or she will be accused of plagiarism or piracy, which is an act of stealing other people's intellectual property and assuming or pretending as if they were your own. Then over to the next slide. Like I said earlier on, writing begins with combining individual alphabets into words, words into phrases, phrases into clauses, clauses into sentences, and sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into larger stretch of texts, essays, or passages. Now, what is paragraph? It's important we discuss paragraph development because it is paragraphs that are composed to make up larger stretch of writing. Now, what is a paragraph? A paragraph is a group of sentences that express a single idea. It is a group of sentences that talk about a particular topic. When we talk about a paragraph, we are talking about a collection of sentences that center around a single idea. A group of sentences that talk about that idea in detail, that give more details, that give examples, illustrations, more information, and more points, more ideas about that single idea. That is why it is not possible to have a one sentence paragraph. A one sentence paragraph is regarded as a fragmented paragraph. There has to be a collection of sentences for it to be regarded as a paragraph. In fact, some scholars argue that a full-fledged paragraph has to have at least 5 sentences. Anything below that is regarded as a fragmented paragraph. Other scholars argue that a paragraph has to be at least a half page long for it to be regarded as a full-fledged paragraph. So, how do we mark a paragraph when it comes to writing? How do we separate one paragraph from another? How do we mark the end and the beginning of a new paragraph? There are two ways in which we mark paragraph when it comes to writing. The first sentence of the group is indented. That is, it begins a little bit more to the right of the margin than the rest of the sentences in the group. Is when it comes to writing, there is a style which we call indented style. In that case, a little margin is left by the left hand side of the paper. From the beginning of the paragraph, a small space is pushed inside the page, and that indicates that this is the beginning of a fresh paragraph. Another way in which we mark the beginning of a new paragraph is to leave a blank line from the preceding paragraph. That is to say, as soon as we finish writing a paragraph and we want to begin a fresh one, we can leave a small space or a blank line. Then we begin the subsequent paragraph. So as soon as someone sees a blank line between the lines in the write-up, someone knows that this is the end of a paragraph and this is the beginning of the next paragraph. Let's go to the next slide. And now the topic sentence. When we talk about a topic sentence, we are talking about a sentence within a paragraph that contains the main idea of that paragraph. So the topic of a paragraph is usually introduced in a sentence. This sentence is called the topic sentence. Any paragraph has a particular sentence which is called a topic sentence. And like I have just said, that sentence reflects the main idea of the paragraph. It is that sentence that contains the basic ideas, the main information, the most important part of the paragraph. That is to say, when you are to take out that sentence, it basically summarizes the whole paragraph because it contains a basic idea. In other words, all the other ideas are whole controlling ideas because they are what give more detail, give more information and more illustration about the topic sentence. The topic sentence can do more than introduce the subject of the paragraph. A good topic sentence states an idea or an attitude, i.e. the controlling idea about the topic as well as which controls what the sentences in the paragraph will discuss. Yes, if for example there are 5 sentences in a paragraph, one of them is usually the topic sentence. The other 4 are what we call the controlling ideas or the controlling sentences. They are sentences which give more ideas, more illustrations, more exemplifications about that topic sentence. That is to say, if one sentence is the topic sentence, all the other sentences are supporting it. They are about supporting ideas, giving support about the topic sentence by providing more information about it. Now, how do we recognize the topic sentence? Where should the topic sentence be placed in the paragraph? There is no unanimous agreement among scholars on where to put the topic sentence in a paragraph. Some scholars prefer to put it at the beginning, some at the middle, some at the end of the paragraph. Because it usually introduces the entire writing, the topic sentence is often placed at or near the beginning of the paragraph. Yes, most writers prefer to put the topic sentence at the beginning or near the beginning of the paragraph. In other words, most writers usually use it to introduce the whole paragraph, and that makes it easier for readers to easily identify where the paragraph is heading. However, some scholars also prefer to put it near the middle or even the end of the paragraph, depending on the type of paragraph it is. Yes, sometimes writers may decide to put the topic sentence at the middle or near the end of the paragraph. So like I have just said, it depends on the style the writer chooses to employ. Sometimes both the topic sentence and the controlling idea are not stated clearly in one sentence, but they are present. In this case, both are implied or suggested in the development of the paragraph. Yes, sometimes writers don't even have to clearly state the topic sentence or the controlling ideas. Sometimes these are just implied. It is up to the readers to decide or to locate where they are. That is to say, both the topic sentence and the controlling ideas are just implied, and during the development of the paragraph, they are discussed in more detail. So it's up to the reader to locate where they are in the sentence. So basically, the position of the topic sentence depends on the style employed by the individual writers. Some writers prefer to put it at the beginning to introduce the whole paragraph. Some may decide to put it at the middle or near the end of the paragraph. From now on, we are going to discuss the different categories of writing, beginning with essay writing. What is an essay? When we talk about an essay, what do we mean? An essay simply refers to any short piece of writing that analyzes or interprets a situation in a personal way. Yes, when we talk about an essay, we are talking about a piece of writing that gives analysis or interpretation of a particular situation in a way that is personal or personalized to the individual writers. So any piece of writing that is extensive, that is detailed, and that gives analysis or interpretation of a particular situation is regarded as an essay. Many class assignments call for an essay writing because so much of what you write is likely to be in an essay form. Yes, many class assignments and even exams scripts come in form of an essay writing because most of what is written is given in a more detailed, more essay form. Except where it is otherwise instructed, most class assignments, exams come in form of an essay form. Some essays contain the opinions of the writers. Some classify or compare and contrast situations or show relationship between things or ideas. Some describe a particular event, and in some the writer tries to convince the reader to follow a course of action. That is a persuasive essay. Yes, essay can come in many forms depending on the opinion of the writer, depending on what the writer writes about. Some essays classify or compare and contrast situations. Yes, sometimes you can have an essay that gives comparison and contrast between two situations. Sometimes you can have an essay that shows relationship between two or more things or ideas. Sometimes you can have an essay that describes a particular event or a particular incident or happening. And sometimes you can have an essay that is persuasive, that tries to convince the reader to follow a particular course of action or to take a particular decision. Essays are made up of three parts: introduction, main body, and conclusion. Yes, like most writing tasks, essay also has three parts. There is an introductory part, then there is the main body, and there is a concluding part. Now, types of essay. In English, there are basically four main types of essay. There is narrative essay, descriptive essay, expository essay, and argumentative essay. Now, the first two are discussed on this slide. The first one is narrative essay. This tells a story of what happened in the past, which could be factual or created, that is fictional. Narrative essay is the kind of essay which is written to talk about something which took place in the past. It is used to discuss events, incidents, happenings, experiences that took place sometimes in the past. And those experiences can be factual or fictional. In other words, They can be about things which actually happened, or something which are just imaginative or creative or fictional. The dominant tense used in the narrative essay is the past tense. Yes, since it talks about things which took place in the past, so the dominant tense used in the narrative essay is the past tense. If the narration is a typical experience, what people usually do, or it may be going on now, the present tense is used. Yes, if the narrative essay is about something which is ongoing or something which is habitual, then the writer may choose to use the present tense. But basically speaking, in narrative essay, it is the past tense that is used, since it involves telling a story about something which took place in the past. If, for example, you are walking along the road and you witnessed a fatal accident, then you may wish to write an essay about what transpired during the accident. As such, you are going to the past tense since the event is already in the past, and that is called a narrative essay. Or, for example, you traveled to a particular place last year. You traveled, let's say, to Abuja last year to attend a particular gathering. Then now you want to write an essay about your experience at Abuja. That is also a narrative type of essay because it involves writing about something which took place in the past. So the tense used is the past tense. It involves recall or recounting an experience that took place sometimes in the past. Now the second type of essay is the descriptive essay. Descriptive essay. This gives a clear picture of a situation or an event, its outlooks, its behavior, and so on. Here, adverbs, adjectives, figures of speech, metaphors, simile, etc. are used. Yes, as the name implies, descriptive essay, it gives a description about an event or an incident. So, this essay is meant to give a clear picture about what it describes. It gives a clear picture, a clear portrait about the situation or event it is meant to describe in such a way that it gives a clear outlook or a clear behavior of that event or incident. That is why adverbs, adjectives, or figures of speech such as a metaphor, simile, etc. are used in this type of essay because the aim is to give an image, a clear picture, a clear portrait in the mind of, to create a clear portrait in the mind of the reader so that he or she may visualize what you are describing. The description must be organized so that the reader can vividly imagine the scene, object, or person being described. Yes, like I have just said, the description here is organized in such a way that the reader can be imagining, can be visualizing, can be having the picture of the scene, the objects, or the person being described. That is why it is called a descriptive essay, and that is why it uses descriptive words such as adjectives, adverbs, and figures of speech, because the aim is to give a clear picture, a true picture of what is happening to the reader. The topics that are usually common in descriptive essay are topics such as my first day, the topics such as my first day in the university. When you are asked to write an essay about my first day in the university or about the Salah day in my community or the New Year's day in my community, all those are descriptive kind of essay. Here you as a writer are expected to give a clear picture of the Salah day or the market day or your first day in the university to the reader, so much so that he may be visualizing the events, the happenings, the activities that are going on among the people in that very descriptive type of essay. Now over to the next slide to discuss the remaining two types of essay. Now another type of essay is the argumentative essay. This type of essay presents a point of view convincingly for the reader to share or agree. As the name implies, argumentative essay, it involves argument. Argument about two particular points of view. Argument in which the writer takes a side about two particular courses of action or two particular viewpoints. argument in which a reader chooses a particular motion and go against the other motion. So it is meant to either persuade, prove a point, or discuss problems by giving various sides of the argument with or without solution, and use facts where necessary. Yes, argumentative essay must be persuasive. When you write an argumentative essay, you have to persuade your reader to be on the side of your argument, because you are proving one point and disproving another point. You are going for one point and against the other point. So you have to be persuasive and convincing so that the reader will agree with your point of view. Sometimes an argumentative essay may propose solutions about the problems raised, and sometimes they don't propose solutions about the problems they raise, but they are expected to use facts where necessary. So if you write about a topic such as between teachers and doctors, who are more important in the society, or teachers are more important in the society than doctors, then when you write about this, then it is called an argumentative essay. You are arguing that teachers are more important than doctors in the society, and you want your readers to agree that yes, teachers are really more important in the society than doctors. Likewise, when you write an essay about a topic such as trade or business is more important than education, this is also an argumentative type of essay, because you are arguing you are arguing you are arguing about two particular points of view, and you want the reader to be on your side of the argument, and you are meant to persuade or prove a point that yes, business is really more important than education. Then finally, the last type of essay is expository essay. This involves giving explanation or specific directives. Yes, this one just gives explanations or directives about how to do some particular things, or about how to prepare some particular things, or how to operate some particular machines, and so on and so forth. It is a kind of essay that enlightens the reader through analysis, comparison and contrast, classification, and the exemplification. The aim is to instruct or inform. Yeah, this kind of essay enlightens or educates the reader through analysis, through giving comparison and contrast between two particular things, also through classification of different things, also through giving examples about a particular thing. If, for example, you are given an essay titled "How to Operate a Computer" or "How to Prepare my favorite meal," all this how to essays, how to prepare my favorite meal, how to operate a computer, are regarded as expository type of topics, because they are expected to capture explanation and directions about how to do certain things. So they also involve analysis, classification, and exemplification, and the aim is to instruct or to inform the reader. The aim is to give direction to the reader about how to do certain things, or to inform him or her about how to do certain things. And that is all about these four types of essay: narrative essay, descriptive essay, argumentative essay, and the expository essay. Now let's go to letter writing. On this slide, we have another type of writing activity called letter writing. Letters are also other means of correspondence between individuals. Although nowadays emails and text messages are more commonly used by individuals and organizations, letters still enjoy a pride of place in terms of utility, and is widely used by many people and organizations to correspond or communicate with other people or organizations. Yes, although nowadays emails and text messages are mostly used to correspond with other people, but there are instances where letters are still found very important when it comes to sending information from one person to another person, or from one person to an organization, or from organization to another organization. So still letters are used by individuals and organizations, despite the fact that email and text messages are more commonly used, but still letters are really important. Letters are very much important in organizational activities. That is why companies employ highly trained and specialized secretaries and legal practitioners to help, among other responsibilities, in writing good letters for them. Yes, because letters are important. That is why companies and other organizations still employ special and highly trained secretaries or legal practitioners who will be writing letters for them, or who are writing letters for them, among other responsibilities. Now let's go to the next slide. Types of letter writing. Yes, there are a number of categories of letter writing. Although there is controversy among scholars with regards to the types of letter writing that should be adopted in normal communication. What I mean by this is that there are some scholars who classify letters into two, formal and informal, and there are other scholars who classify letters into three, formal, informal, and semi-formal. However, what is most important is to know that the type of letter is determined by the tone, the physical features, and the purpose for which it is written. Is whether letter is a formal one or an informal one or a semi-formal one. What makes them different is the tone, the language, the words used by the writer, as well as the physical structure or physical properties of the letter, as well as the purpose for which the letter is written. These are what classify letter into either formal or informal or semi-formal, as the case may be. Now we are going to begin with the formal letter before we subsequently discuss the other types of letter. First of all, a formal letter is also known as business or official letter. So that is to say that other names for the formal letter are business letter or official letter. It is meant for official communication in business establishments, public institutions, or private organizations. Yes, mostly formal letters are used to communicate with business organizations, public institutions, or private organizations. In other words, formal letters are not sent between individuals discussing personal or individual matters. They are mostly sent between persons to organizations or between organizations to other organizations. And these organizations may be business establishments, may be private organizations, may be public institutions, and so on and so on and so forth. A formal letter may take the form of an application letter, letter of complaint, letter of request, letter of inquiry, letter of acknowledgements, and so on. So these are all different categories or different purposes for which formal letters may be written. They may be written for application purpose, or for complaint, or for request, or for inquiry, or for acknowledgements. So these are different forms which formal letters may take. The language of formal letters should be accurate, concise, clear, and strictly formal without unnecessary greeting or show of familiarity. This is the most important aspect of the formal letter, the language. It must be concise, accurate, clear, straightforward, and strictly formal. You are not expected to show unnecessary greeting or familiarity with the person you are writing the letter to, because it is formal. So it should go straight to the point. That is why formal letters are not expected to be very long, because there is no room for greetings, no room for cracking jokes, no room for showing any familiarity with the person you are sending the letter to. It is expected to be strictly concise, very brief, accurate, and straight to the point without any informality. It is advisable that a writer of a formal letter should avoid language usages as ambiguity, contraction, slang, cliche, idioms, proverbs, ordinance, archaism, and abbreviations. Yes, all these usages should be avoided, not only in the formal letter but in all formal types of writing. Ambiguities should be avoided. Contraction, slangs, cliche, idioms, proverbs, wordiness, archaism, and abbreviations, all this must be avoided when it comes to formal letter. In other words, formal letters must be devoid of all these language usages. Now we are going to discuss the format of a formal letter. By format, we mean the structure or the physical properties of a formal letter, or the procedure in which someone can follow to write a formal letter. The first in this is the address. Formal letters have two different addresses. Yes, in a formal letter there are two different addresses. There is the address of the writer and that of the reader. Or we can say the address of the addresser and that of the addressee. Or the address of the sender and that of the recipient. The address can be in a blocked or slanted form and must be written in full with the exception of formal abbreviations such as PMB or PO Box. When you come to write the address, all information must be in full, must be written in full, except formal abbreviations such as PMB or PO Box, and the address can be in a blocked format in which all the lines begin on the same margin, or in a slanted form in which the lines are slanted to the right. The address of the writer is written at the top right hand side of the first page, followed by the date. Yes, the first address written is that of the writer, which is located at the top right hand side of the page or of the paper, and it is followed by the date. Then immediately below it is the address of the reader or recipient or addressee. That is the person to whom the letter is written, and that is written at the left hand side below that of the writer. In other words, while the address of the writer is written at the right hand side, that of the reader is written at the left hand side, and that of the reader is below that of the writer. Abbreviations such as ST for street, RD for road, or AV for avenue are not allowed. Remember that we said all information are written or must be written in full except the formal abbreviations such as PMB or PO Box. So ST for street, RD for road, or AV for avenue are not allowed in both the address of the writer and that of the reader. The name of the country should be written if the letter is to be sent to another country. Yes, in a situation where the letter is to be sent to another country, name of the country of the writer should be written. And number two, we have the date. The date is also an important part of the formal letter. Date is usually written below the address of the writer and before the address of the recipient, followed by a full stop. What we are saying here is that the date in a formal letter is written immediately below the address of the writer, before the address of the recipient, and the date is always followed by a full stop. There are many ways in which dates are written in a formal letter. These are some examples that can be seen on this slide. 2nd April 2016, or 2/04/2016, or 02 02-04-2016, or April 2nd, 2016, etc. There are many ways in which dates are written in a formal letter. These are some examples as can be seen on the slide. Then number three, we have the salutation. Salutation is also another format or structure of the formal letter. Salutation is a kind of greeting with which writers usually open their letters. Salutation usually come in form of dear sir, dear ma, dear Sani, dear Helen, and so on and so forth. And salutation is written at the left hand side of the paper immediately below the address of the recipient. Yes, salutation comes immediately below the address of the recipient before the main body of the letter, and it is followed by a comma always. When you say dear sir, D should be in capital letter, S in capital letter, then comma after sir. Or dear madam, D in capital letter, M in capital letter, then comma. Or dear Sani, D in capital letter, S in capital letter, then comma. Or dear Mariam, D in capital letter, M in capital letter, and followed by a comma. Or dear Awal, D in capital letter, A in capital letter, followed by a comma. Sometimes there are instances in which abbreviations are used with titles such as Mr., Mr., Mrs., MRS, or Miss, MISS, etc. However, one can decide to drop the full stop after each title. For example, you can just say Mr. without full stop, or Mrs. or Miss without full stop. So in the salutation, it can be Dear Mr. Sulaiman, D in capital letter, M in capital letter, and S in capital letter, Dear Mr. Sulaiman. Or Dear Mrs. Habibu, D in capital letter, M in capital letter, H in capital letter, Dear Mrs. Habibu. Or Dear Miss Rakia, Dear Miss Rakia, D in capital letter, M in capital letter, and R in capital letter, Dear Miss Rakia, and so on. Another one is the title or heading of the paper. Yes, a formal letter is always expected to have a heading or a title. This is written below the salutation and shows the subject matter of the letter. Yes, it is the title or the heading that indicates the subject matter or the content of the letter. And the salutation, the heading or title comes immediately below the salutation. Titles or headings can be written in either upper or lower case. Yes, title of the letter or heading can be written either completely in upper case or in upper and lower case. However, if written in lower case, titles must be underlined. Yes, if titles of letters are written in in small letters or lower case, they must be underlined to mark them different from the body of the letter. But if they are written in uppercase, then they don't have to be underlined because that already marks them different from the main body of the letter. Also, a writer may decide to write titles in bold print. Yes, if the letter is a typed copy, the writer may decide to put the title in a bold print, and titles usually are written at the middle of the page. Then number 5, we have the body of the letter. This section contains all the information which the letter aims to pass across. Yes, this is where all the information, all the ideas, all the message, all the points the writer wants to convey to the reader is written or is passed across. If it is a letter of complaint, this is where the complaint is lodged. If it is a letter of request, this is where the request is written. If it's a letter of application, this is where the application is written. The section also contains the introduction, the middle, and the conclusion of the paper. Yes, the body of the letter is where we have the introduction and the middle and the conclusion of the paper. The introductory part gives background information on and purpose of the letter. Yes, the first sentence is where the writer gives a background information as well as the purpose for which the letter is sent. And the middle part presents and develops the item of information the letter is intended for in short paragraphs. If this is the middle, this is where the information is, or the point raised is developed, or the information which is intended to be passed to the reader is developed in short paragraphs. And the concluding part states the desire or hope about what should happen next. This is done in order to avoid abrupt ending of the letter. Yes, this is where the letter is concluded, and it is usually ended by writers with the desire or hope about what should happen next or the outcome that is expected from the reader. And this is done mostly to avoid abrupt or sudden ending of the letter. And The body of the letter, like I have said earlier on, is where the writer should be careful about the language he or she employs or used. Because here the language is expected to be strictly formal. This is where the letter is expected to be devoid of ambiguity, archaism, slang, idioms, and so on and so forth. So the language should be strictly formal, formal, precise, concise, and straight to the point. Now, number 6, the complementary clause or subscription or conclusion. This is written about 2 lines from the body of the letter at the left or right side of the page. Complementary clause or subscription is the concluding part of the letter. That is why some people call it conclusion. And it is written about 2 lines from the main body. That is to say, below the main body of the letter, about 2 lines, that is where complementary clause is written, either at the left or at the right side of the page. The most acceptable form of complementary clause or subscription is in formal letters is yours faithfully, with Y in uppercase and F in lowercase. Yes, someone can decide to write yours faithfully, Y in capital letter, F in small letter, then followed by a comma. Other alternative ways of closing formal letters include yours truly, best regard, sincerely yours, best wishes, and so on. But the most important thing to note is that whatever complementary clause one chooses to use, the Y in yours is always in a capital letter, and if it's yours truly, then T in small letters, best regard B in capital letter, R in small letters, or best wishes B in capital letter, W in small letters. Note that only the first letter of the complementary clause is written in uppercase. Yes, as I have just said, a comma should be used at the end of the complementary clause before the signature and the name of the writer. And these are the last item or last format of the formal letter. Number 7, the signature and the name of the writer. The signature of the writer should follow the complementary clause or subscription, then his or her full name. Yes, shortly or immediately below the complementary clause comes the signature of the writer, and it is followed by the full name of the writer. A woman should identify her gender by indicating her marital status, putting Miss if she is not married and Mrs. if she is married, or else MS, which applies to both married and unmarried women. Yes, for some reasons, women are expected to indicate their marital status in most formal letters. So they can do that by writing Miss MISS if she is not married, or Mrs. if she is married, or else she can choose to write Miss MS if she doesn't want to reveal her marital status, because Miss applies for both married and unmarried women. All these titles should be written in bracket after her full name. Yes, if she is married, after her full name. For example, if her full name is Safiya Abdullahi, then after writing Safiya Abdullahi, then she opens a bracket and indicate her marital status with either Miss if she is unmarried, or Mrs. if she is married, or Miss if she doesn't want to disclose her marital status. That is the end of the format of the formal letter. Now on this slide is the example of a formal letter, and all those items which we discussed can be seen on this slide. For example, at the top right hand side of the page is the address of the writer, number 122 Waziri Gidado Road, Walo Local Government, Kano, then followed by the date, like we have said during our discussion, April 2nd, 2021. Then immediately below it is the address of the reader or recipient, the registrar, Bayer University, PMB 3011, Kano. Then below that is the the salutation, dear madam. Then below the salutation is the title or heading of the letter of request for deferment of my studies. This is the title of the letter, and the title captures what is inside the body of the letter. Then below the title comes the body of the letter, which as can be seen is written in 4 lines. Then after the body, below the body, we have our complementary clause, yours faithfully. Yours faithfully with Y in capital letter and F in small letter followed by a comma. Then signature, this is the space for signature, then full name of the writer. This is a sample of a formal letter. The second type of letter is an informal letter. Unlike formal letter, which is written to people such as chairmen or general managers of some companies, governors, vice chancellors, presidents, and other important personalities that are holding public or private offices. This letter, which is called an informal letter, is written to family members, relatives, friends, and acquaintances. That is to say, this letter isn't written to the people that are holding any public office, but rather they are people who are close to the person writing the letter. That is why it is also known as a friendly or a personal letter. Informal letters can be written for a number of purposes, such as to congratulate someone on the birth of a new baby, to express sympathy, or to offer greetings. These are some few reasons why an informal letter can be written. If your friend finishes a university, you can write an informal letter to congratulate him or her. If your uncle or your auntie has something that is worth congratulating, you can write an informal letter to congratulate her. If your sister gave birth to a baby, you can write an informal letter to congratulate her. If something bad happened to someone who is close to you, you can write a letter of sympathy or condolence, or to offer greetings, and so on and so forth. Due to the level of familiarity between the writer and the recipient of an informal letter, the language of the letter is expected to be relaxed, casual, and chatty. Just unlike a formal letter where we see the language is concise, formal, straight to the point, and brief. In this case, the writer can be chatty, can be relaxed, and can be casual. So the language here is strictly informal. However, the level of informality in the language may differ from one person to another. That is to say, depending on how close you are to the recipient, the level of informality in the use of language may differ. For example, the letter you write to your father, the language of the letter you write to your father is different from the one you write to a friend, or to a brother, or to an uncle or mother, because there is different level of respect that you accord to these individuals. So even though all are letters that are regarded as informal, but the one written to father or mother or uncle has certain level of respect than the one written to a brother or a friend or a sister. Now over to the next slide. Now, format of an informal letter. When you come to write an informal letter, there is a format or a procedure or structure that you must follow. Number one, there is an address of the writer. In an informal letter, only the address of the writer is written, and like in the other letter, this one is also written at the top right hand side of the first page, followed by the date. So in this case, there is only one address, that of the writer. And like informal letters, the address of an informal letter can be in a blocked or in an indented or slanted form. The writer may decide to punctuate all the lines in the address and the date, or he or she may decide to leave out the punctuation marks altogether, but one must be consistent. In other words, when you start using punctuation marks in the first line, then all the other subsequent lines in the address must be punctuated. But if you decide not to put any punctuation marks, then you must leave them out all throughout the address. Then after the address, what comes next is the date. The date is written below the address, just below the address, at the same right hand side of the page. The next is the salutation. In informal letters, the salutation usually takes the form of Dear Sani or Dear Joseph. For close relatives, one can use my dear mother, or my dear daddy, or my dear friend Sani, or my dearest Mariam. Note that a writer may decide to write the salutation in upper and lower case as the above examples show, or he or she may capitalize only the first letter of the salutation, as in my dear brother. Yes, salutation can be written either in upper and lower case, like in the first examples, my dear mother and dear daddy, capital M, capital D, capital M again, or dear daddy, capital D and another capital D. Or the writer may decide to capitalize only the first letter of the salutation, like in my dear brother, only the M is written in capital letter, but other letters are all in small letters. So it's either a writer writes the salutation in upper and lower case, or he or she may capitalize only the first letter of the address. The salutation is always followed by a comma. Yes, after the salutation, my dear mother, then comma, my dear father, comma, my dear brother, comma, or dear Sani, comma, dear Mariam, comma. And the salutation, like in an informal letter, salutation comes below the address of the writer. In this case, at the right hand side of the page. I mean at the left hand side of the page, not the right hand side of the page. Then it is followed by the next item, which is the body of the letter. This is the stage where the writer explains the message he or she wants to convey to the reader. Yes, this is the space where the writer writes to explain the points, the information, the message he wants to convey or he wants to pass across to the reader. The tone of the language of informal letter is very important, as it shows the level of familiarity and closeness between the two parties. In this kind of letters, a writer may share jokes or use idioms and slang. Yes, the tone or the language here must show informality. It has to show the level of informality and closeness between the two parties, between the writer and the reader. In this situation, the language should be strictly informal. The language should be chatty, should be relaxed, and should show the level of closeness between the two parties involved in writing the letter. That is why in this kind of letter, jokes can be used, idioms, slang, archaic expressions, contraction, and so on are all allowed in this kind of letter. The language of an informal letter may be used in its contracted form, such as doesn't for does not, your for you are, isn't for is not, I've for I have. Yes, all these contracted forms can be used in informal letters, as can be seen on the slide. One may begin an informal letter by asking about the person's personal health and family welfare. Yes, in this kind of letter, someone can start by greeting, can start with greeting. You can start by greeting the reader or by asking about his or her personal health or his family welfare. All these are allowed because the person reading the letter is someone who is close to you. Is either a family member, a friend, or an acquaintance. So you can begin by asking about his health or that of his family members, or by greeting. All these are allowed in this type of letter. Then the next is the complementary clause. For informal letters, the complementary clause or subscription may include any of these forms. Yours sincerely, with Y in capital letter and S in a small letter, then followed by comma. Yours affectionately, Y in capital letter, A in small letter, or yours, just yours, with Y in capital letter, or your loving daughter, your loving son, your loving friend, Y in capital letter, L in capital letter, D in capital letter. Your loving daughter or your loving son, Y in capital letter, L in capital letter, and S in capital letter. Or your lovely friend, Y in capital letter, L in small letter, and D and F also in small letter, followed by a comma. So in essence, complementary clause must always be followed by a comma. Then finally, the name of the writer. This should be written below the complementary clause. And unlike in the formal letter, in this case there is no signature of the writer. Immediately after the complementary clause, what comes next is the name of the writer. And sometimes the writer may decide to put his full name, like Aliyu Yakub Yusuf, or just the first name Aliyu. You are loving friend Aliyu, and that's all. This is an example or a sample of an informal letter, and all the physical structure that we have discussed, all the format or procedure that we have just discussed can be seen on this slide. For example, the letter begins with the address of the writer, number 35 Junjimi Street, Sani Menege Quarters, Kano State, then followed by the date 4th May 2016. And as can be seen, here the writer decides to put punctuation marks in all the lines of the address. However, one may decide not to use any punctuation marks here. Then the next is the salutation, which comes immediately after the address at the other side of the page, the left hand side. Dear Said, with capital D and capital S, since Said is a personal name which always begins with a capital letter. And the salutation Dear Said is followed by a comma, which is a rule in an informal letter. Then after the salutation comes the body of the letter. In an informal letter, there is no title. Informal letters require no titles of the letter or heading. As such, what comes next after the salutation is the body of the letter. And as can be seen, this letter is extensive. It's a bit too long, unlike an informal, unlike a formal letter. And here the writer may decide to start with greeting the person receiving the letter. For example, this one says, or it begins with, how are you getting on? How is the weather at your new place? These are all questions that will never ever appear in a formal type of letter. And in the letter, as can be seen, there are places where the language shows the level of familiarity between the two parties involved. There is the use of jokes, there is a use of contraction, and so on and so forth. Then immediately below the body of the letter, then what comes next is the complementary clause or conclusion or subscription. Yours sincerely with Y in capital letter and S in small letter, followed by comma, then followed by the name of the writer of the letter, Daud. In this case, the writer decides to use only his personal name. However, one may decide to use full name. For example, Daud Yakub. Lastly, we have the semi-formal letter, which is another type of letter. This letter has features of both formal and informal letters. That is why it is regarded as neither formal nor informal, and also both formal and informal. In other words, this letter has captured some features of both formal and informal letters. As such, it is neither this nor this. This is a letter in which someone writes to the person he or she knows but doesn't have a close relationship or familiarity with. That is to say, the letter is written to someone you know. You know the person to whom you are writing the letter, but you don't have close relationship or familiarity with the person. These people include people such as former school head or boss for information, or later to an adult family friend, or later to a father's or mother's friend, and similar such persons. These letters are called the semi-formal letters. Then what about the format or the physical properties or the physical structure or the procedure of writing the semi-formal letter? The semi-formal letter has only one address, the address of the writer, and the address is followed by the salutation. The salutation comes in form of Dear Mr. Tayo, or Dear Hajia Hadiza, or Dear Alhaji Musa, or Dear Sir, with D in capital letter, S in capital letter, or Dear Mr. Tayo, D in capital letter, M in capital letter, T in capital letter, and followed by a comma. The salutation is always followed by a comma. Then the salutation is followed by the body of the letter. In this case, there is no heading or title of the letter. What comes after the salutation is the body of the letter, and the body should be written in a polite and respectful language. Yes, the language here must show politeness and respect, because remember, the persons you are writing to are adult members, and there is no close relationship or familiarity between you and them, even though there is, you know each other personally. However, the language shouldn't be too serious or too formal, as otherwise the letter will look more formal than informal. So the language shouldn't be too formal or too serious, even though it shouldn't be too casual and too chatty. The clothing of a semi-formal letter may range from more formal to less formal. So the letter may be closed with complementary clause or subscription such as yours sincerely, yours truly, best regard, and so on. If it's yours truly that is chosen, then Y in capital letter, S in small letter followed by a comma. Yours truly, Y in capital letter, T in small letter followed by a comma. Or best regards, B in capital letter and R in small letter followed by a comma, and so on. And finally, the writer should write his or her full name or his or her initial and the surname below the complementary clause. Yes, in the end, after the complementary clause, then the writer must write his or her full name or initial and surname below the complementary clause. For example, Aliyu Yakub Yusuf, that is full name, or initials and the surname AY Yusuf. This is the end of lecture 1 on this module, that is module 4. We shall continue in lecture 2 of the same module. That is to say, after this first lecture, we have a second lecture still on module 4. Thank you for listening. Let's meet in the next lecture.